Adolf Hitler rise to power. Brüning administration. The Great Depression provided a political opportunity for Hitler. Germans were ambivalent about the parliamentary republic, which faced challenges from right and left-wing extremists. The moderate political parties were increasingly unable to stem the tide of extremism, and the German referendum of 1929 helped to elevate Nazi ideology. The elections of September 1930 resulted in the breakup of a grand coalition and its replacement with a minority cabinet. Its leader, Chancellor Heinrich Brüning of the Centre Party, governed through emergency decrees from President Paul von Hindenburg. Governance by decree became the new norm and paved the way for authoritarian forms of government. The NSDAP rose from obscurity to win 18.3% of the vote in 107 parliamentary seats in the 1930 election, becoming the second largest party in parliament. Hitler made a prominent appearance at the trial of two Reichswehr officers, Lieutenants Richard Schuringer and Hans Luding, in late 1930. Both were charged with membership in the NSDAP, at that time illegal for Reichswehr personnel. The prosecution argued that the NSDAP was an extremist party, prompting defense lawyer Hans Frank to call on Hitler to testify. On September 25, 1930, Hitler testified that his party would pursue political power solely through democratic elections, which won him many supporters in the officer corps. Brüning's austerity measures brought little economic improvement and were extremely unpopular. Hitler exploited this by targeting his political messages specifically at people who had been affected by the inflation of the 1920s and the Depression, such as farmers, war veterans, and the middle class. Although Hitler had terminated his Austrian citizenship in 1925, he did not acquire German citizenship for almost 7 years. This meant that he was stateless, legally unable to run for public office, and still faced the risk of deportation. On February 25, 1932, the Interior Minister of Brunswick, Dietrich Klogjes, who was a member of the NSDAP, appointed Hitler as administrator for the state's delegation to the Reichsrat in Berlin, making Hitler a citizen of Brunswick, and thus of Germany. Hitler ran against Hindenburg in the 1932 presidential elections. A speech to the Industry Club in Dusseldorf on January 27, 1932 won him support from many of Germany's most powerful industrialists. Hindenburg had support from various nationalist, monarchist, Catholic, and Republican parties, and some Social Democrats. Hitler used the campaign slogan Hitler über Deutschland, Hitler over Germany, a reference to his political ambitions and his campaigning by aircraft. He was one of the first politicians to use aircraft travel for political purposes, and used it effectively. Hitler came in second in both rounds of the election, garnering more than 35% of the vote in the final election. Although he lost to Hindenburg, this election established Hitler as a strong force in German politics. Appointment as chancellor. The absence of an effective government prompted two influential politicians, Franz von Papen and Alfred Hugenberg, along with several other industrialists and businessmen, to write a letter to Hindenburg. The signers urged Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as leader of a government independent from parliamentary parties, which could turn into a movement that would enrapture millions of people. Hindenburg reluctantly agreed to appoint Hitler as chancellor after two further parliamentary elections, in July and November 1932, had not resulted in the formation of a majority government. Hitler headed a short-lived coalition government formed by the NSDAP and Hugenberg's party, the German National People's Party, DNVP. On January 30, 1933, the new cabinet was sworn in during a brief ceremony in Hindenburg's office. The NSDAP gained 3 posts. Hitler was named Chancellor, Wilhelm Frick Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring Minister of the Interior for Prussia. Hitler had insisted on the ministerial positions as a way to gain control over the police in much of Germany. Reichstag fire and March elections. As Chancellor, Hitler worked against attempts by the NSDAP's opponents to build a majority government. Because of the political stalemate, he asked Hindenburg to again dissolve the Reichstag, and elections were scheduled for early March. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building was set on fire. Göring blamed a communist plot, because Dutch communist Marinus van der Lubbe was found in incriminating circumstances inside the burning building. According to Kershaw, the consensus of nearly all historians is that van der Lubbe actually set the fire. Others, including William L. Shirer and Alan Bullock, are of the opinion that the NSDAP itself was responsible. At Hitler's urging, Hindenburg responded with the Reichstag fire decree of 28 February, which suspended basic rights and allowed detention without trial. The decree was permitted under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which gave the president the power to take emergency measures to protect public safety and order. Activities of the German Communist Party, KPD, were suppressed, and some 4,000 KPD members were arrested. In addition to political campaigning, the NSDAP engaged in paramilitary violence and the spread of anti-communist propaganda in the days preceding the election. On election day, March 6, 1933, the NSDAP's share of the vote increased to 43.9%, and the party acquired the largest number of seats in parliament. Hitler's party failed to secure an absolute majority, necessitating another coalition with the DNVP. Day of Potsdam and the Enabling Act. On March 21, 1933, the new Reichstag was constituted with an opening ceremony at the Garrison Church in Potsdam. This Day of Potsdam was held to demonstrate unity between the Nazi movement and the old Prussian elite and military. Hitler appeared in a mourning coat and humbly greeted Hindenburg. To achieve full political control despite not having an absolute majority in parliament, Hitler's government brought the Ermächtigungsgesetz, Enabling Act, to a vote in the newly elected Reichstag. The act, officially titled the Gesetz zur Behebung der Not von Volk und Reich, law to remedy the distress of people and Reich, gave Hitler's cabinet the power to enact laws without the consent of the Reichstag for 4 years. These laws could, with certain exceptions, deviate from the Constitution. Since it would affect the Constitution, the Enabling Act required a 2/3 majority to pass. Leaving nothing to chance, the Nazis used the provisions of the Reichstag fire decree to arrest all 81 communist deputies. In spite of their virulent campaign against the party, the Nazis had allowed the KPD to contest the election, and prevent several social democrats from attending. On March 23, 1933, the Reichstag assembled at the Kroll Opera House under turbulent circumstances. Ranks of SA men served as guards inside the building, while large groups outside opposing the proposed legislation shouted slogans and threats towards the arriving members of parliament. The position of the Centre Party, the third largest party in the Reichstag, was decisive. After Hitler verbally promised party leader Ludwig Koss that Hindenburg would retain his power of veto, Koss announced the Centre Party would support the Enabling Act. The act passed by a vote of 441 to 84, with all parties except the Social Democrats voting in favor. The Enabling Act, along with the Reichstag fire decree, transformed Hitler's government into a de facto legal dictatorship. Dictatorship. At the risk of appearing to talk nonsense, I tell you that the National Socialist movement will go on for 1,000 years. Don't forget how people laughed at me 15 years ago when I declared that one day I would govern Germany. They laugh now, just as foolishly, when I declare that I shall remain in power. Having achieved full control over the legislative and executive branches of government, Hitler and his allies began to suppress the remaining opposition. The Social Democratic Party was banned and its assets seized. While many trade union delegates were in Berlin for May Day activities, SA stormtroopers demolished union offices around the country. On May 2, 1933, all trade unions were forced to dissolve and their leaders were arrested. Some were sent to concentration camps. The German Labor Front was formed as an umbrella organization to represent all workers, administrators, and company owners, thus reflecting the concept of National Socialism in the spirit of Hitler's Volksgemeinschaft, People's Community. By the end of June, the other parties had been intimidated into disbanding. This included the Nazis' nominal coalition partner, the DNVP. With the SA's help, Hitler forced its leader, Hugenberg, to resign on 29 June. On July 14, 1933, the NSDAP was declared the only legal political party in Germany. The demands of the SA for more political and military power caused anxiety among military, industrial, and political leaders. In response, Hitler purged the entire SA leadership in the Night of the Long Knives, which took place from 30 June to July 2, 1934. Hitler targeted Ernst Röhm and other SA leaders who, along with a number of Hitler's political adversaries, such as Gregor Strasser and former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, were rounded up, arrested, and shot. While the international community and some Germans were shocked by the murders, many in Germany believe Hitler was restoring order. On August 2, 1934, Hindenburg died. The previous day, The cabinet had enacted the law concerning the highest state office of the Reich. This law stated that upon Hindenburg's death, the office of president would be abolished and its powers merged with those of the chancellor. Hitler thus became head of state as well as head of government, and was formally named as Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor, although Reichskanzler was eventually quietly dropped. With this action, Hitler eliminated the last legal remedy by which he could be removed from office. As head of state, Hitler became commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Immediately after Hindenburg's death, at the instigation of the leadership of the Reichswehr, the traditional loyalty oath of soldiers was altered to affirm loyalty to Hitler personally, by name, rather than to the office of commander-in-chief, which was later renamed to Supreme Commander, or the state. On 19 August, the merger of the presidency with the chancellorship was approved by 88% of the electorate voting in a plebiscite. In early 1938, Hitler used blackmail to consolidate his hold over the military by instigating the Blomberg-Fritsch affair. Hitler forced his war minister, Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg, to resign by using a police dossier that showed that Blomberg's new wife had a record for prostitution. Army Commander Colonel General Werner von Fritsch was removed after the Schutzstaffel, SS, produced allegations that he had engaged in a homosexual relationship. Both men had fallen into disfavor because they objected to Hitler's demand to make the Wehrmacht ready for war as early as 1938. Hitler assumed Blomberg's title of Commander-in-Chief, thus taking personal command of the armed forces. He replaced the Ministry of War with the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, headed by General Wilhelm Keitel. On the same day, 16 generals were stripped of their commands and 44 more were transferred. All were suspected of not being sufficiently pro-Nazi. By early February 1938, 12 more generals had been removed. Hitler took care to give his dictatorship the appearance of legality. Many of his decrees were explicitly based on the Reichstag fire decree and hence on Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. The Reichstag renewed the Enabling Act twice, each time for a 4-year period. While elections to the Reichstag were still held, in 1933, 1936, and 1938, voters were presented with a single list of Nazis and pro-Nazi guests which carried with well over 90% of the vote. These elections were held in far from secret conditions. The Nazis threatened severe reprisals against anyone who didn't vote or dared to vote no.